Hello, this is What It Takes to Lead, a podcast about Mike Sterlacy's faith, family, friendships, and business lessons learned over 40 years of selling insurance and building a rapid growth insurance agency in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. I'm one of your hosts, Garrett Cooper, and today I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Leif. Special guests, Covarrica Agency Alliance Managing Partner, Chris Sterlacci, and Covarrica Founder and Chairman, Mike Sterlacci. Gentlemen, how's everyone doing on this somewhat fine afternoon, depending on where you're living?
Well, it's great in Florida.
Looking to try to stay warm, maybe do a fire later.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, here
nice.
in Dallas, it is, I feel like the weather is like paint by number. You know, it's like it's 90 one day, it's 40 the next. It's you go to bed with the window open, you wake up, you know, with a sixth blanket on. And but yeah, it's good. I enjoy the cold weather. So the colder, the better for me. Which then asks, why have you always lived in Texas? But
Well, they're not usually getting cold weather like this all the time.
yeah, I know. It's funny because I had a convertible at one point in my life, and I felt like this part of Texas, a convertible is viable for about 4 weeks out of the year. It is either way too cold or way too hot, and you get like 4 good weeks of 60, high 60s, low 70s, and after that, you're sweating or you're freezing.
So, Leif, I've had a little bit of market experience with what you just mentioned. So I noticed when I flew down in August, like early August, the rates for the Ford Mustang convertible, they're practically giving them away, right? And then
They're like, we need someone to drive this. Just get the oil circulated.
I come back 2 months later in October, and it's now skyrocketed. And I'm like, I guess this is the time of the year to drive the convertible.
That's too funny.
Mike, my first question's for you. To say you're familiar with today's guest would be a significant understatement. For our uninitiated listeners, please tell us about U.S. Air Force veteran and current Covarrica Agency Alliance managing partner, Chris Sterlacci.
Well, Chris has I remember when he was just a little kid, and I don't believe in the astrology stuff, but he's a Gemini. And one of the comments that I thought was always cute is you're going to think it's two people because he moves so fast. But kind of speed forward, he came to me after his brother. We orchestrated him to go into the Air Force. He didn't want to go to college. He was just kind of doing his own thing. And so Chris says, well, I'm going to go to the Air Force. That's what I'm going to do. And I said, oh, well, okay, Chris.
I think that was the 8th grade, wasn't it?
That I don't recall. I remember that when he went into the Air Force, I honestly thought he'd be a lifer because he really blossomed. He really blossomed in it. And so he decided that he wanted to come work in the family business. And let me be clear on that. When we use the term family business, I don't really see it that way. What I see it as is because Chris is my son and Samantha's my daughter and Michael's my oldest son, they have the opportunity to work in the company, whereas to go to work somewhere else, it would be more difficult, I would assume. But there's no nepotism here. I mean, my father, I had to let him go. Son Michael, it didn't work out with him on 2 different occasions. So it's not that they can work in the company. It doesn't matter how well they work. They have, if anything, I'm harder on them than I would be on a typical employee. So, but Chris persevered through everything. We started him as a receptionist, and we did that because he needed to know what made the company work. But this was back in the days when we had receptionists. Nowadays, you really don't. You've got the phone systems and everything else has been automated. But he decided, I said, where would you like to work in the company? And he said he wanted to work in the Alliance. And so he started in the Alliance and he's worked there. And, years and years later, I don't know how many years it was, but essentially we got to the point with the succession planning and made the decision to have the 4 different companies that I had. This was before Ansel, that each one runs totally independent of the other one. And so when we went to Pennsylvania for the succession planning with the family, Paul Kiesling said, okay, what are you going to do with the alliance? And I says, well, I'm either going to sell it to SIAA or sell it to Covarrica, but it will be sold unless Chris wants to take it over and buy it. And so he decided that that's what he wanted to do. And I'll let him use his own words to say what finally brought him to that crossroads. But that's basically it. So he's proven himself to be good at what he does, and he's earned the right to it. And what was important to me as his father, and also the owner of the business, is that I don't think anybody will look at Chris and say that it was just handed to him. I mean, he earned it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I made the comment about nepotism. I've seen too many family businesses where the heir apparent wasn't competent or really committed, and that the staff and the company itself suffers. So he's earned the right to do what he's doing, and I'm all for it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of dovetail on that, I mean, you covered a bit of my question in that opening, but I mean, Chris, for you, I mean, you're going from the military, which is, to say it's structured would be an understatement. I think they're dictated. And by the way, you opted in to go into the military in wartime, which is, incredible. Thank you for your service. I don't know if people get tired of hearing that or not. The thank you for the service thing, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. But I mean, how was the transition going from kind of a military structured day to being in a company?
Horrific is a nice way of putting it. You go from a very structured environment where as soon as you wake up from the day to your head hits the pillow, you know exactly what your day is going to look like, to the civilian world, which is, what do you want to do? How do you want to make this day work? But I did want to hit on one thing that Mike was talking about, which, my transition of why I wanted to come into the company is, I was aircraft armament systems, loaded bombs on F-22s,
Mm-hmm.
did a couple tours in the Honor Guard. Loved that mentality, and I was contemplating being a lifer, but I came to a part of my life where my faith was extremely important. And making that decision to follow Christ was important to me. And I'm looking at all the talents and the resources that were at my fingertips that my father and the many people in my life had created that I wasn't utilizing at all. I was kind of forging my own path and recognizing I wanted to have a family. Doing that in the military and bless the guys that can do that. Those are the guys I think. For me as a vet is the guys that continue to go through that with their family and doing that. It's very difficult. But bless them. I'm very thankful for those guys. But looking at those talents that my father and the family had offered, I wasn't utilizing at all. So getting out of the military, creating that opportunity for a future family, and seeing what God had gifted me with through the opportunity of being born into the Sterlacy family, if you will. I wanted to be a good steward of those talents and resources and not let them go to waste. So yeah, I'd say going in, it was very structured. Yeah. The transition for a vet, I will tell you, obviously you've heard of organizations like 22 Kill, 22 veterans commit suicide. A lot of that is because of the nucleus that they don't have when they get out. Their entire life is built around that military. I was fortunate enough to be very connected with my dad in that side of the family. And so I had people in my life that I could rely on. And so that made it easier or more palatable. But I remember the first, it was the first 3 weeks. And I was sitting there going, Dad, I gotta work. And he's like, no, it's just study, go to school. And I was like, I have to do something. I'm sitting around doing nothing. Like, I'm not used to this. And he's like, okay, well, I'll get you an interview, but that's where your name stops.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was that was a deal. And I even got told that because you worked with me for a little bit. And, and I remember it was just like, he's just like anybody else. And I was just like, yeah, but his last name's the same. You know, it's just like, nope, he's just like anybody else. And I'd see Mike lay into him every once in a while. And I was like, man, he may have it harder than anybody else.
I think the best story of that, I don't know if you, Wendy Kresbach, her and I started around the same time when we were doing the accounting and IT. I was fixing one of her towers or one of the computers because back then we had the towers, right? And I was underneath the desk plugging in some stuff, and Mike walks by and puts my benefits card on my desk. And he goes, "Here you go." And I go, "Thanks, Dad." And what she heard was that I said, "Thanks, dude." She goes, "Chris, did you just call the owner of the company dude?" I said, "No, I called him Dad." She goes, "Why would you call him Dad?" And I was like, "'Cause it's my dad." And she freaked out. She's like, "Nobody told me. I'm sitting next to the owner." I'm like, and like, we're
Did
in
you
this
not recognize the last name? It's not common. So, by the way, there almost should be an episode of like, how many different ways has your name been pronounced?
Oh gosh, that is a whole episode, I'm sure.
Too funny. But and I did notice whenever you did work in the company, it wasn't. I mean, you were almost full-time student, full-time employee, full-time. Yeah. Like you almost did the military schedule with your personal life.
Yeah, it was
cool. It was cool to see. It was just like, man, that dude hustles.
Yeah, well, so I was up at the office at like 9:00 at night, and I'd come in on Saturdays to reorganize the supply room. Yeah. You think that I'm doing that for everybody else? Literally, I couldn't find anything, so I went through and rechanged everything. But yeah, it was work through the day. Then I was taking online classes, prepping for going to Brookhaven Community College, taking online classes there in the evenings. And that really kind of helped my sanity. It was 2 years of just a blur through that transition because that's I needed to stay active.
And Chris, let me ask you. I mean, you and I, I like to think we have a lot in common. I mean, way beyond our love of cars and other topics. But both of our fathers, were entrepreneurs and business people. And I know for me, watching my father hustle, always inspired me. Is that where you think you get some of your, where you got your drive from, is seeing how, Mike taking on, whether it's, redoing the house while he's running a business full time and then starting another business. Like where do you think your drive, which is unique, in today's world, right? We were having sort of an offline conversation about this, but where do you think that came from?
So I would say there's multiple contributors to that. Obviously, if I'm talking about exclusively my dad, my faith was kind of important, and watching him struggle with his is really kind of the catalyst that got me started on mine, because I was like, look, I'm either going to be serious about this or I have nothing to do with it. And watching him in the various trials that he was having and just being on his knees, giving it up to the Lord was, okay, well, the guy that is in my corner, the most important man in my life, is over there dealing with all those struggles and doing that. All right, this is something I really need to pay attention to. And so that kind of sparked me there. And then even today, I mean, shoot, he's pushing 70 years old, love him to death, and he's starting another company. I'm like, okay, show off. I mean, when do you, his hobbies are work, and more work, but he does it because it's his, and just to brag on him for a little bit, it's his mission. It's what he wants to be available to those around him and creating opportunities for others. That drive and determination as an entrepreneur is something that really I don't see very often. We've got in the Alliance, we have 100 sub-agents, and seeing somebody that come in that cares about their family, their faith, the employees and everything, it's a rare mix. And when you find that, you're just like, kindred spirits, like right off the bat, and you can do so much partnering with each other and scaling opportunities. So yeah, my drive, I would say I was unmotivated before the military. The military definitely kicked my butt into gear. But what has sustained that would be me watching my dad go through those struggles, overcoming them, and then also like what we were talking off mic. Was the safety net. My dad, knowing that he's been through that, and I'll hit on part of that transition when we went with Paul Kiesling was, I told Dad, or he told me, I can't remember which one it was, but I needed to be the one in the ring getting my teeth knocked in, and my dad being there with the smelling salts as the coach going, "Hey, get back up, let's keep going." He's that what is that, Jiminy Cricket in the back of my head? I hear Mike's voice sometimes back there.
That's too funny. My head goes to Rocky. He's down in the corner of the ropes and, come on, Rocky. No, but that's interesting though, because Garrett, you, myself, and Chris were all the offspring of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I think in Mike, because your dad was always in sales, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was in sales and general manager. He liked to work with younger people, but he was not successful as an entrepreneur. He tried it, but he didn't. Interesting. When Dad did work with us, it was very important for him to be liked, and that's not important to me. I mean, I want to be liked, but.
You're okay being hated too.
Well,
what matters is the task.
Well, what Winston Churchill said is that if you've got enemies good, it means you stood for something.
Right.
But being respected is incredibly important to me. And Dad would say that. He says, Mike, they may not like you, but they all respect you. And in running a company, you've got to have that respect. So to tie it back to the bringing family members into the business, you're walking a tightrope. You do not want the staff to think that you're cutting slack for your children at their expense. It's a meritocracy. It is not a birthright. Fortunately for Heidi and I, is we're successful enough, and this is what I've told all three of my children. You got to earn your way in this company. Now, if you want to start another business, I'll be glad to help you with that. But as far as Covarrica is concerned, it's not about us. It's about the methodology or the ethos of what Covarrica stands for. So anyway, that's really it. I think, and one of the questions that we've talked about is, in a family business, the owner has got to really hyper focus in on the skill set of their children, and can they do the work? And are they wanting to do the work? And if they don't want to do the work, the worst thing, the second precept, the worst thing that you can do is give them the responsibility and the money for something that they're not earning. And then you're going to try and tell other people in the staff and the company that they have to do work. And they're going to say, wait a minute, this isn't right. This isn't fair.
No. Yeah.
And Mike, is that how you came to the conclusion that, Chris was the right person then to run Covarrica Agency Alliance?
Let me come about this a little bit differently. The biggest struggle I'm having now is finding people that really want to lead. Because once you start to lead, you find out how much harder it is than what you thought it was. I mean, watching Chris, it's been a great joy for Heidi and I she'll tell the story to anybody that wants to hear it, which is, used to be when Chris would come over, when we would have our dinners, try and have them on Sundays like the Blue Bloods, but we don't do a real good job like they do. But when Chris would come over, he would get sick of me talking business, because there's only three things important for me to talk about: religion, faith, business, and politics. Is one of those three.
The three ones that you're not supposed to. That's what we.
Yeah, that gets me going. So at any rate,
I don't know. I think you like talking cigars too, Mike.
Oh, cigars and food and drinking.
Yeah, cigars usually the vehicle to have this
yeah. But if you want to get my juices going, those are the three topics that really get me going. But at any rate,
now I don't know how to talk about anything other than that.
And but what happened with Chris was, the minute that he finally decided to buy the majority interest out of the alliance, we saw this dramatic change. And Heidi laughs and says, used to be Chris would get mad at Mike because he always was talking about business. He would always bring up business at the dinner table. And Chris was saying, stop. And now that Chris is in the position he's in, so now he can't wait to get in the door and start talking business. So it's that shift that takes place when you realize, okay, this is now my legacy that I'm creating, which is why with Ansel, I said to you, Garrett, I said, where do you want this to end up? So that you start from there. Mm-hmm. You know, I've said this many times, figure out where ultimately you want to go or what you want to do or what you want to be, and make that decision, and then make certain that every decision that you make going toward that either gets you closer to that or just don't do it at all. I was listening to our podcast that we did last time, and I made that point. And I think about it, it's still true. If we stay focused on where we're going, first of all, figure out what is it that we want to do and where do we want to go? What is the future going to look like if for me to say that I'm successful or that I've lived a good life? And then make certain that every decision you make supports that. So Chris, he made the decision to do it. We're still working through it all, and it's been a very painful experience for both of us, because it's we have to separate the accounting. We have to separate so much that used to be tangentially tied to each of the other companies.
Right, so, because you were the sole owner of all the
correct,
companies, so
correct.
It was easy to have it all intertwined.
And it's easier because there's a lot of economies of scale to gain. Of, you can share resources, you can share, as an example, like y'all kind of piggyback off our network and infrastructure and things like that. And I mean, if you're truly running it as separate, you've got to start unwinding stuff like that. Not telling you your internet's getting cut off next week, by the way.
No, thanks.
I'm just
Appreciate
kidding.
that.
Well, you know what? If I can add in a point for that, Leif, because that's an important statement you just made. What it does, and this is the benefit that I'm now seeing that I didn't recognize before, it is that every action has to be justified in its value. So, for example, with Ansel still has Covarrica as its, I guess, one of its main customers. Mm-hmm. But now Covarrica can look at Ansel and say, are we getting what we're paying for?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which is different than if you're just an employee and, well, you can just go do that. No, wait a minute. This has to be paid for separately. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the Alliance, with its relationship with Covarrica.
Right.
It really is allowing for each company to stand on its own merit and have its own P&L and ability to figure out, are we doing the right things? Whereas in a larger company, that becomes more and more difficult. And certainly in a typical family business, which is why I wanted to kind of quantify the statement family business. Usually a family business doesn't create separate companies within itself that stand alone.
Right. Yeah. And the reason I brought up the whole, we're all the sons of entrepreneurs is because we all kind of grew up in an environment where it's like, Dad didn't clock out at 5:00 and that was the last time he thought about work. I mean, it was, like if my dad got a phone call, if he didn't answer it, that was money that wasn't going to the family, because it was somebody booking an appointment or something like that. And you get to walk those trials with him too. If he's being sued, or he's dealing with the IRS, or he's dealing with, a terminated employee. I mean, you were part of that conversation at home because you're his family nucleus, right? And that's the thing is, like, we saw how hard our parents worked at it. Yeah. And it wasn't a thing of just kind of like, oh, well, that's Dad, he owns a company. It was just like, no, like Dad's gone a lot. Dad's working at 8:00 every night, or Dad's working Saturdays and Sundays. Or on an unrelated note, it was so cool to see your dad's heart like light up when he got into that Mustang. That was cool. That was just seeing him, because he worked hard, dude. Yeah, yeah. So he's had quite the journey. He'd be a fun one to talk to on this. And that's something that, I think, I wish I had that conversation with my brother on a podcast, or my dad, or, something. And so that may be something I have to do at some point. Yeah. So very cool. Hey, you guys had mentioned something. I think, Garrett, you had brought it up, and I had a question about that. Is Mike, I think it was Garrett that said it. So just kind of building off that question, you've got three kiddos. I've been fortunate enough to know all of them. In fact, I think I picked this one up from high school a couple of times when I was working here. And probably because I wrecked something. Yeah, I think you flipped a car or something and needed a ride home. Or you see Samantha running around here in her in her school, private school attire and stuff like that as like a second grader. But I mean, what did you see in Chris to where you were just like, that's the right person for the Alliance?
Well, I think a better question is, do you see that in me?
You're looking for that for your own affirmation. But
I've thought a lot about this. The truth is, Leif, that there are very few people within Covarrica or that I've known that have said that they want to take on more responsibility.
Right.
So I would say it wasn't that I could see, well, Chris is the guy. I would say that's not it. Quite frankly, until he said that he would take over and buy me out of or buy a majority interest in Covarrica Agency Alliance, it was still up in the air. It wasn't, I can project, and that's been a fault of mine. For years, I'd look at the culture index. I would look at the different ways of running businesses, and everything on the paper looked like these people could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But did they have that internal combustion? Did they really have the fire in the gut? Did they really want to do it? And I want to go back to something else too that you just said a second ago, Leif, about your dad not answering the phone because it could be money for the house. This is going to sound so silly, but I've never really cared about money. Because I knew that if I was any good at, sales, if you can sell anything, you can make a decent living. You can pay the bills because there's so few people that want to sell. They think it's nasty or it's below them. And all you got to do is watch like Glenn Ross, Glenn Gary, and you see how Hollywood views salespeople. So it was the kind of thing that when I realized that radio, TV, film was not going to be my future, even though that was my degree, I said, well, in sales, I can make a decent living. I'm not tarring a roof. I'm not, doing construction. I'm not killing myself. And I have the gift of gab. So that was a logical thing for me to do, was to get into sales. But once I realized I could make a decent living, and I was married to Chris's mother for 12 years, going on 12 years, we were making plenty of money, but we were just existing. I didn't get a sense of fulfillment. I loved remodeling houses. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be remodeling the house here in Florida and the one in Dallas, because I thought I'd have a lot more time with the succession planning. So I put all these wheels in motion, and anyway, so that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself, but
that's his hobby.
But I want to be clear on something. And that is the reason why I work so hard after a point, once I hit the point where I knew that I would be taken care of financially, and I was okay. It then became about I wanted to do something that would be live beyond me. And so whether it's you, whether it's Garrett, whether it's Chris, I'm agnostic to who it is. I mean, I would absolutely love for my 3 children to be successful and be in the business. I mean, how cool would that be? The blue bloods where everybody's a cop except for Aaron, who's a district attorney. But they're spending their lives together. And as a father and as a family man, the ability to have a relationship with your kids beyond just dad and mom and kids is really awesome. Now, it's not that important to Michael, and I would say Samantha either. I mean, it is important to Chris, but Samantha is, I told her, just build your resume. You're working here at Covarrica, you're working in the human resources, which is truly a future position because it's people and culture. And she's growing up in a world where everything is remote. Everything is, it seems like everybody wants to be as little involved in their company as possible and still get a paycheck. And I mean, it's crazy. So she is in the middle of all that and coming to terms with it. But whether she stays in the company or not, I'm good with that. I would love to see it, but that's her choice. And son Michael, he's doing his own thing. Doesn't really have the interest. Whereas Chris, has this drive to make a difference and build his own legacy. So whether it's, we're talking to other people in the company now, Covarrica, which I'm excited to see that we're being very clear that we've got quite a few young people that are putting their foot in the water of leadership and saying, maybe I want to do this. So, one person we're talking to about the sales director position asked a very, very good question, which was, how do I make certain that I don't fail like my predecessor? Those are the kinds of questions that, I'm just so thankful that when a person is saying, how do I succeed in this job? As opposed to, give me the title, give me the money, and then I'll do the work. They want, it's almost reverse engineering. When you do the work, then you've earned the respect and the title. But if you want the title and the money before you've earned it, it generally doesn't work out that way. So I would say to other family members that own businesses, you better make darn sure that your children, anybody in your family, has earned that right. Because if they haven't, even if they're successful in the position, they'll always feel like, well, Clarence Thomas, in his book, his autobiography, it's a fabulous book. I think he went to Harvard Law School, and he makes the comment, because of affirmative action, that his degree is not worth anything. When he tried to get a job in the private sector, they wouldn't hire him because they felt like he was given that because he was black. And of course, you can't beat his legal mind. The guy's brilliant, but he went into the government because he couldn't get a fair shake in the business world, because they thought that, the affirmative action, he was given that, and they had lowered the standards for him to graduate. This is the kind of stuff that family owners of businesses better make real carefully their decisions. Are their children truly the ones that can take the company to the next level? If they're not, and you've got somebody in the company that's willing to put in the sweat, blood, and tears to get you there, you're far better off giving money on the side to your kid than putting them in that position.
Yeah, because that's the alliance is something that you built since 2001. Along with several other people along the way, but the idea really came from you and Gary Saunders, and then that's a lot of trust to give and to someone that, like Garrett said, it's somebody that probably better than anybody. But it has been cool to watch you guys kind of work together to get this figured out.
Yeah, and I want to build on that. Chris, Mike's obviously talked about how his perspective on it, but I've had the good fortune to watch this succession planning process, and I have to say, from my standpoint, I think the two of you handled it extremely well. Can you talk a little bit about the process that Mike and you went through? And basically, do you believe there's a model here for other families to follow in making this generational transition?
Yeah, I would say, processes are good to give, some bumper rails or some guidance, but it really, at least in my opinion or my case, was more of the heart and intentionality behind it. So although me and my dad would fight, argue, I remember one time
that's because you're Italian.
Well, we're Italian. Yeah, we talk with our hands and our hearts, right? But I remember my favorite memory was on a Saturday. We had a car show going on. It was 100 degrees. The air conditioning wasn't working in the building. We're reorganizing the entire upstairs, having all the raised sit-stand desk brought in, monitors set up, and it is chaos, right? And it's me and Rhonda sitting up there. Mike comes in on Saturday and he's mad because there's nobody who else is coming in to help, right? Who's saying, hey, here I am, send me, I'll volunteer for this, other than Rhonda and I. And so he's getting all upset and worked up. So he's hollering at me. And at the end of it, he says, dang it, I'm just trying to tell you I love you. And it was just the best. And so why I bring that up is, you look at processes and all these other things, but I know at the bottom of my heart that my dad's in my corner and that he wants me to be successful and to succeed. And so knowing that, I can take, if the Italianness, if you will, I can take that barrage because I know he's doing it the best way he knows how, giving me the information the best way he can. And at the end of the day, he's going to love me through it. And, so that gives me confidence to tackle a lot of situations. And yeah, we may fight about it. And that's just, sometimes it's actually easier to fight about something because then you can get to the solution or through that much quicker versus like stepping on eggshells and not bringing stuff up. No, we are very open. We talk about, he's had conversations. Here's where you're screwing up. Stop screwing it up. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know.
But how difficult is that, Mike? I mean, whenever you see something like that, where it's like, I can tell him or I can let him go through this.
Well, sometimes he does both.
because that's the thing is like as a dad, as a father, or a mentor or a coach or anything that you've done to where you've mentored other people. It just happens in this case that you share DNA. It's always like a slippery slope of like, do I put the guardrails up or do I let them fall?
You ultimately let them fall. Eventually, you figure that out. I've had to figure that out the hard way. So what I would suggest for people out there to figure out, okay, what's the worst case? How much is it going to cost if it blows up, and can I afford it? And if the answer is yes, then you just let them fall. And I want a saying that I said a long time to you ago, Chris, was that you are now getting in the ring with Mike Tyson. You're going to get your ass kicked, and I'm not going to help you other than give smelling salts and tell you can do it and go back to the corner. I've fought it now for 32 years, and it's not that I can't continue to do it because, as you pointed out, I'm still remodeling, and I'm starting another company with Garrett and Leif. But I made it very clear to Garrett, Leif, and Tony, listen, this is your legacy, not mine.
Right.
From day one, how are you going to get rid of me? Right. So it is a lot of this is being talked about in a family context. And I understand the application because there's a lot of agencies out there. Clearly, there's a lot of agencies out there where they're trying to bring in family members to take over the agency. And just there's the basic, do they have the competence? Do they have that internal drive? Is it something that they really want to do? Very often you'll find that this is something that you, as the owner, as the dad, or as the whatever patriarch, really want, but it's just not real. So to answer your question directly, over the years, I have seen a lot of mistakes, not just from my children, but from people that work in the company. And some of them were pretty significant costs. But then I look back on it, and the lessons that we learned has made us what we are. So it's a decision to where if you jump in, I mean, I have a cousin, first cousin, same name as mine, Mike Sterlacy. He owned a business up in New York, and it's travel insurance. And he had to retire because he just could not let other people fail. It was just eating him up. He was involved with everything, and it was just burning him out. Well, I'd like to think that nothing that's happening will bankrupt us. I don't think that it will. I mean, like if they nationalize insurance or something, well, that would put us out of business. But realistically, there's always going to be a need for what it is that we do. So I don't worry about those sorts of things. What I'm worrying, not worrying is not the right word. What I'm looking for are people that say they want to get in the ring. Put me in, coach. And that has surprised me how rare that is. I don't really know why it is. I think a lot of people, with these podcasts, with the all hands meetings that we're having, I'm starting to see a lot of people, younger people in the company, say, maybe I was thinking about it wrong, or maybe there's more to this than what I thought, because we're somewhat programmed to hate the boss, to find fault in the owners, and boy, I wouldn't do that, but they don't know the why that was done.
Or
so
in those shoes, or they've been in those shoes,
or they don't want to be accountable to the decision.
Yeah. So let's take, for example, the genesis of the alliance, which is what Chris is buying me out of. Mm-hmm. It was not me. Gee, I need to set up another company. No. Here's what it was. I figured out early on that organic growth in an agency is a slow and steady process. It's at least a year for personal lines. It's about 3 years for commercial lines. And it's very difficult. And it's a very difficult thing to do, organic growth. So then we look at mergers and acquisitions, which is also part, and we've done a lot of those as well. Well, the concept of the alliance, it came from Gary Saunders was at I think it was a CIC, and he met Nick Sanfilippo. And Nick was the very first master agent for SIAA, which it culminated with like 50 master agents, and now it's down to in the 30s because SIAA, when it sold to Odyssey, is now buying a lot of the master agencies that their kids can't take it over, and they're having a problem with their own perpetuation. So we got into it. I got into it because I knew that the appetite of the carriers, they want new business. They constantly want new business. And if they see in your agency integrity and somebody they want to do business with, and you're showing that you can continue to grow, I think Covarrica and Covarrica Agency Alliance, Chris, aren't we like, what, 300 million?
Yeah, like around 332 million.
So that you can't ignore those numbers that all fall under the umbrella of Covarrica, which is a subset to SIAA, which is, my gosh, what is it now?
7-8 billion.
Yeah, 7 or 8 billion.
13% of all premiums.
13% of all
the independent agents.
Yeah,
it's a huge number. So it was, you could say it was just blind luck. A blind pig will eventually find an acorn. But I don't want to say that I had this brilliant idea of getting into the alliance. I got into the alliance because it made absolute sense. The initial cost, I think, was like $60,000 to buy the territory. And we had to convince the carriers to do business with us, because back in those days,
they didn't even know what it was.
They didn't know what it was, and they didn't like it. They brokering business for other agents through your agency contract was very verboten. I mean, you did not do that. You could lose your contract. And now it's gone 360 to where that as long as you're making certain that the business is being handled properly, they'll let you bring in that business, which was the genesis of the alliance. So Chris wanted to get into it. Now, he didn't say this, but when Chris came out of the military, he really did change. He was extremely focused. He had a 3.8 GPA with community college. Now, this is a kid who both my boys didn't graduate with their class in high school. They were goofballs. This is why God hates divorce, because they would go from our house, which is highly structured, to my ex-wife's house, and she'd say, let the consequences rule what happens to them.
I like your title for it. It was Disneyland and Fort Knox. That's what we had.
Oh yeah. Yes. So
I talked to a friend of mine, and he said, "Yeah, my ex-wife's house where they get to go be feral for the weekend."
That's actually pretty good, Leif. But anyway, that's a woman's job is to be more of a nurturer. It's the dad's job to be the ones preparing kids for the world. So at any rate, long story short, he goes out of the military, goes to junior college, has a 3.8. And then I said, we talked about where he would go to finish his degree. And I said, Chris, you ought to think about SMU, because if you're going to stay in Dallas, the fact is that it's a great place to network and meet people. It's a very prestigious school. And of course, it's like $60,000 a year. Well, because of his GPA and because of the military, I mean, he had a full ride for the last 2 years, and it was free. Wow. So he earned the right to get a higher education at SMU and graduate from SMU. And I think, would you graduate with 3.5?
Yeah, I managed a 3.5 GPA at the Cox School of Business,
awesome.
which I was shooting for a 4, but then I realized that I wasn't going to win any awards for that because the kids there are smart, man.
Well, you were working too, Chris. I mean,
I was, but my point is, I was blown away going to that school, and I honestly was sitting back going, "There's no way." So much of my life, I'm sitting back there. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And then slowly, little by little, I turn around like, oh crap, we did that. and that's been an awesome journey. So
what's been very, very fortunate for me to experience is now that Chris is the managing partner and majority owner in the Alliance, I can work with him and he can look at other ways of growing his business. It doesn't necessarily have to stay exclusively for the network. I mean, he can get beyond that. And it's the same thing with Ansel. Ansel can work with the Alliance. It can work with Covarrica Retail. It can work with other agencies and other venues. I mean, it is really cool because now I have with Chris, somebody running the Alliance, Garrett, you, Leif, and Tony running the Ansel. It's very exciting, and I can sit back and do what I love to do, which is the critical thinking or the problem solving or the visionary. Did you think about this, or what about this application? So it's very invigorating for me, even though I can't believe I'm going to be 70 years old. And especially living out here in Florida, which is, I tell people, it's God's waiting room out here. There's a lot of people that just, some people are pretty active, but a lot of them are they're just pulling back.
Well, Mike, it's the Chuck Swindoll.
I'm too old. Yes, that was a great sermon, wasn't it?
Right.
I know, it's funny how fast. That's what I was telling Hudson, my son, a couple of weeks ago, as I said, because he was just like, "Oh my gosh, this week feels like it's so long," and I'm like, "I blinked and it's Thursday," And so, but it's funny because I told him, I said, "Man, there's points of your life to where, like, I wake up every morning and then like my brain, it's like, oh, you're 28, and then I wake up and my back's like, you're 63, and so it just goes by so quickly." And just kind of reflecting on that. I mean, Mike, whenever you set up the Alliance, is this kind of where you pictured it was going to go? Or did you, because what's cool about what you've done is your hand is still involved. It's not like you sold it back to SIA or you sold it to some VC firm and just, took a check and walked out.
It is not what I thought it would be. But that, that's the old joke of, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I can look back at my life and all the plans that I had and all the thoughts that I had, none of them happened. So, but that's not to say that what I have isn't better, because I think it actually is. But to answer your question, I had thought that the Alliance would be much larger than Covarrica. Now, technically it is, because if you look at this over 300 million and premium, that's much larger than the retail agency has. I don't know.
The 300 is encompassing. So the Alliance represents 2/3 of that number.
Right. Right.
Our independent agents make up the majority.
Well, right. But I'm just saying that's all leveraging, and that's a whole nother podcast about leveraging. But I guess what my point is that with business, when you own the business, now this is something I've said to some of the ISMs that wanted to sell to some other deal to get in an IPO, and they could get 10, 15 times EBITDA, and then if it goes public, they'll get 20 times EBITDA. And I said, wait a minute, but you've sold your soul. You're living the American dream when you can own and run a business.
And there's a whole bunch of ifs you just said.
Now, so as a side note, what I wanted to synthesize as much as possible in both the Alliance and Covarrica Retail and now Ansel is to create a business model that is the way God intended businesses to run, which essentially allows you guys to all bring in your family, your friends, to work with them, as long as people are willing to follow the precepts and do the work that's required. That's why, nepotism doesn't cut it. I mean, because of the association with friends or family, they get an audience, but they still have to walk through that door and earn it, and they have to continually earn it. But getting back to just specifically with the Alliance, it's a crawl, walk, run. The first thing, this is what, a year, maybe. I don't even know how long you've been the managing partner, Chris. Has it been a year yet?
That feels like a week.
Yeah. So getting used to the ownership seat and then realizing what you can and what you shouldn't do, and learning how to focus in on, okay, what is the goal? What is the goal I'm wanting to hit? And then am I doing the best steps to get to that point? You can always change it, but you do the pro forma and you figure out what you want to hit and what you're trying to do.
Well, if I could add to that, because one of the conversations we had, I think it's actually been about a year, almost a year and a half, but essentially all the things that I did before I was owner, I'm now looking back as owner going like, oh, that was stupid. Or, hey, that was a Band-Aid. And it's like hitting me in the face now. And I'm sitting there going, I got to change. I got to change the way I look at things, the way I think about things. And meanwhile, I'm also in the back of my head thinking about, I remember Dad talking about this stuff. I don't want to admit that he's right, but damn it, he's right.
Yeah, no. And that's the thing is that, and it's not to, I mean, I wouldn't beat yourself up over it. I mean, you got to realize that it's what I was talking about earlier. That's how you're going to learn.
Right.
And it's experimentation of, hey, you're constantly A/B testing things.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I mean, as a leader and as an entrepreneur, I mean, it seems like going with your gut's always the right move, but I mean, there's definitely, take those kicks in the teeth as a lesson learned.
Well,
for sure.
And one thing too, I mean, Chris, I want to compliment you. I mean, right now, at your age, you're much further ahead than I was, right, when I was running my first startup.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a few years older than you at that time. I mean, I look back now at some of the decisions I made and the way that I handled certain things and certain people and customers at time, and definitely like wince, right? Like, cause I'm like, oh, I should have done it completely different. And I think, your background that you talked about earlier, right, with the military and having different positions at Covarrica, and also just, having that audience too with Mike and being open, right? I mean, I think that's also another thing that doesn't get talked enough about mentorship is, we're all lucky, right? In the sense that Mike's willing to raise his hand saying, hey, I'm willing to mentor whoever is interested, but it takes that other party to say,
right,
I want to be taught. Right.
And I
commend you for having that.
I think it's natural. It's natural. I think as the more you learn and the more you get scarred or deal with experiences, is to actually pull away, and you have to fight that. You actually have to push into that. Dad, I love his quote of like leading into God's left hook. I mean, you just got to pursue it because, and I want to go back to one of the things that we mentioned. Mike's looking for volunteers, looking for people to step up, and I'm looking for the same thing. People that will say, "Hey, I want to own this. I want to move into this," and that is finding a team that can that wants to do those things. Taking it to that next level is awesome. But I remember even in the military, part of why I was so successful in the military, I was that one weirdo that, everybody's like, don't volunteer for anything. And I'm like, I'll do it. I don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm in the military. I don't know what else I'm going to do. So let's just keep volunteering for stuff. That and not doing stupid things, made it very successful for me. But even that transitioning it into the civilian world is looking for opportunities to be part of something, to step up, to involve. And it doesn't have to be all the glory. It could be just stuff in the background, like everything.
Right. There doesn't have to be a title that comes with it, right? Or a promised promotion or something.
I like volunteer.
Well, when people volunteer to take on different responsibilities that really make a difference, I'm not talking about baking cakes and bringing dessert to the office. I'm talking about, let me help with this, finding another producer to join the agency, or working with another producer to help them out without being asked to be paid for. I'll do it if you pay me and give me the title. I mean, if you just put your mind to it and do it, it is noticed by people that are in leadership positions.
Yeah.
If we go back to when I started at Maxim Agency, the principals of the agency did not really understand the larger commercial accounts. And they thought that you could just have an alphabet split on commercial accounts, and because all you're doing is doing certificates of insurance and taking worker comp claims, and pretty simple view of it. But when you get into larger accounts, you'll have like a special verbiage on the certificates of insurance. But more important than that is a relationship is formed between somebody in that business with the agency, and they like working and they like the relational side of it. And so when you would do the alphabet split, you would pull that person away. And I was very obnoxious to Paul McCaffrey and said, we're not going to do that.
And you were like, what, Mike?
I'm a producer. I'm 30. I'm 38 at that point.
Okay, 38.
And I said, we are not going to do this because it's going to create a problem. Now I can look back and give you all kinds of intelligent reasons, but back in those days, it pissed me off. I thought, why are you going to do this? My customers are getting used to dealing with Betty, and then you're going to pull Betty away and give me Susan. Nothing wrong with Susan, but my customer is going to say, well, wait a minute, I asked Betty for this and she understood it. I got to start all over again and train Susie how I want something. And then next week we're going to go to Sarah. Well, it was creating a problem. And I said, we're just not going to do this. And the president looked at me like, who the hell you think you are? And I said, I'm a producer. I'm an agent. Moral of the story, Jack, who is the majority owner, liked what he saw because I was passionate about the business and making certain it stayed on the books. I didn't have a flippant attitude like, well, this is my company and you're going to do business the way I want to, which is kind of what we're dealing with now. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and say this, but going to any restaurant and they're asking you for a tip before you got the food or have any service, to me, is insane.
Yeah.
Why would I give you a tip when I don't even know if the food's going to be cold or it's just nuts. But it's because, well, it's more convenient that way. You can go ahead and tab out. So we're going about things the way a lot of business owners want to be treated or customers want to be treated for this false sense of security. And it's cheaper to do it that way. So the point being that the alliance came from one, having to feed the markets and continue to grow. And while we're still working on organic growth and we're still working on mergers and acquisitions, but it's now of a size to where it can spin off other businesses. Mm-hmm. And so looking for those people that want their chance to really build something, I love that, but I want to make certain that they understand what that really means. And what it really means is you can't be thinking that you can do what you want, when you want, how you want, and what you like. You got to figure out the second precept. What's in the other people's best interest?
Right.
Yeah. And servant leadership, right? I mean,
that's absolutely correct.
You're washing the feet of the people that work for you. Chris, Mike, walked us through really the origin story of the Alliance. But I want to hear from you. What's the future look like? What are you excited about right now? What's coming down the pike? What are your hopes and dreams for the business?
Yeah. So obviously, we're seeing the insurance industry by and large sort of embrace technology. It depends on where you look and how you look. But I would say one of our first blushes with this is really kind of investing into the technology aspect. And I want to make a very specific point on this. We're looking for technologies that actually aid the entrepreneur. Because you see so many of these tech firms come in here trying to remove the value add. Like, I still believe that an insurance agent is a noble profession. They can help bring certainty and clarity into something that is confusing as all get out. And I still like the idea of being able to call up an agent and say, hey, help me understand this. Like, I have an agent. Like, I'm not going to use my own knowledge on my own policy. I need somebody to tell me kind of what it is that I'm doing. And so looking for technology resources that will aid the entrepreneur in servicing their clients more efficiently and giving them access to data. With the Alliance, obviously we have the 100 here in the DFW Metroplex, but a lot of them come from a captive environment, and they are going to be very against that control because a lot of them are real entrepreneurs. They want to control their destiny. So I like the idea of leveraging technologies to really kind of put wind behind their sail and help them achieve more with less. And then, kind of taking those hurdles on that they can't afford or don't have the luxury to do, or time for that matter. So I'd say, yeah, technology, leveraging that, getting back to a more of a communicative type ecosystem where our agents have a voice into how we change over time, giving that voice back when so many of the captive carriers or other markets are trying to pull that voice away. I'm trying to bring that voice back into the marketplace, because I think that's where our true vision and entrepreneurialism will come from, along with insane opportunities. I actually just got invited to for one of our member agents, insurance tech conference that you have to pay so much to be part of it. But it gets away from a lot of the guys that aren't serious about it. And the conversation, it was funny. Like, my top technologically advanced member agents are already part of this. I'm like, guys, you keeping me in the dark. And they're like, we were just making certain you're on our side. It's like, all right, guys, come on. But yeah, it's, I mean, I'm excited for this, for the next 10 years of what the insurance space is going to look like. Obviously, we're going through a hard market. We are in a growth year. And so investing into the model, getting prepared for when the markets open back up, in fact, we just had and I'm not supposed to talk about a couple of things, so I'll just mention one of our carriers says that they're wanting to open back up, which was music to the ears. I was like, I'm going to shout this. And he says, you better not, like, I'm not ready to tell everybody. I was like, okay, come on. But we're seeing some awesome things transition, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Very cool. Well, I think this is the time in the show where we do our recommendations for our listeners. So for this segment, usually what we like to do is recommend either professional development resources or even maybe some personal stuff that we've recently checked out that we think might benefit you, in the hopes that maybe you'll check it out and get something out of it as well. So Leif, I always feel like you've got a couple zingers for us. So why don't you get us started with your recommendation?
So, not recommending a book or a vinyl record or anything this week, even though I have been listening to Greta Von Fleet lately.
Yeah.
Which, if you
that's
were
an easy name to say.
Yeah, Greta Von Fleet. So if you're ever a fan of old Led Zeppelin, and to see that sound come out of someone that looks like they're 25 is insane. I'd love to get like a mic reaction video of that. But I did find something. I'm always looking for kind of a quote to inspire me, or just something that kind of humors me. And so I found something that was kind of humoring, and it's 12 examples over history of adults saying that the younger generation has gone to kind of hell in the handbasket. So I'll read a few. There's 12 here. I read them to my wife, and she's just like, oh, you should do that on the podcast, but maybe not all 12. So I'll pick a couple. They have trouble making decisions. They would rather hike the Himalayas than climb a corporate ladder. This was an article in Time magazine in 2001. In 1951, many young people were so pampered nowadays that they had forgotten there was such a thing as walking. That was an article from the Falkirk Herald in 1951. 1925, an attitude on the part of young folk which is best described as grossly thoughtless, rude, and utterly selfish, which is an article in the Hull Daily Mail from 1925. From 1790, the free access which many young people have to romances, novels, and plays has poisoned the mind and corrupted the morals of many promising youth, which is from the Reverend Enos Hitchcock, which reminds me of some of my parents' thoughts about the music that I listened growing up. In 1330, modern fashion seems to keep on growing more and more debased. The ordinary spoken language has also steadily coarsened, which was Essays in Idleness by Yoshida Kenko. And then lastly, 1st century BC, the beardless, actually there's two more. The beardless youth does not foresee what is useful, squandering his money. That was from Horace. And in 4th century BC, young people are high-minded because they have not yet been humbled by life. They think they know everything and are always quite sure about it. That was from Aristotle. So as I go home to a 15-year-old son, and I walk in the door and he looks at me and just says, bruh, it's just kind of like, man, your generation. And then I have to stop myself and remind of, I think every generation is lamented about the younger generation. So
yeah, that's great.
That's it for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll link out to that article in the show notes. So definitely make sure to check those out.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good illustration between the sort of infinite, sort of push pull dynamic of the senior, versus youth generation, right? They need each other, although we don't always see it that way. My recommendation for this week is a book that I've had for 14 years and has been sitting on my shelf, and I've had a few fits and starts of reading it. But it was bought to me by a former coworker when I just got engaged to my wife. So I guess actually it makes it like more than 15 years old. But it's called the seven principles for making marriage work. I feel very fortunate. I'm married to my best friend, who has definitely made me a better person. But one of the things is, I'd like to have the best marriage possible. And so, this book's been, again, collecting some dust for me for a while. So I said, all right, I'm finally going to read this book. I've heard about it, and I'm really liking it so far.
Now, how long have you had it sitting on your shelf before you
15
picked it up?
years.
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah, there's probably some pages in there where you're just like, why didn't I read this 15 years ago?
Yeah. So the book's by John Gottman. I think it's got some really good practical advice for couples that are in any state of their marriage. Certainly one of the tidbits that I've taken is definitely causing me to reflect a little bit on is anytime you're say having an argument with your significant other, there's a technique called repairing, right? And basically it's almost kind of like trying to de-escalate the tension by making them laugh or some way of doing it. And I didn't know for years. I had my own thing I would always do with my wife, where I often feel like we're sort of arguing about dueling agendas. And so I would say to her, I'd say, Senator, I'm trying to get a deal done here, but I can't seem to get you to listen to what I'm putting on the table. And she would laugh. So turns out I was doing repairing when I was doing that. So anyway, that's my book.
It's funny you mentioned that. There's a video I saw this morning on YouTube, and it was a couple, and every time they start to kind of get into a spat, and you can kind of feel it coming, they put on birthday party hats.
Oh,
and it's just a reminder to themselves of just like how silly this is that we're doing this.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, halfway through the argument, they just kind of crack up laughing at each other. So
yeah. And I mean,
anyway.
You still got to, and look, sometimes the arguments are justified and you got to work through them, but sometimes you need a little space too, right?
Yeah.
And a little humor. So
Absolutely.
That's my book recommendation.
Chris, you got anything to share?
Oh yeah. So one of the books, obviously, some of the things we were talking about that was actually helpful for me while I was going through my transition. So this is one of my recent readings, was a book by Dan Allender. It's called Leading with a Limp. Take full advantage of your most powerful weakness. And in that book, what they kind of go through is they dive a little bit into the nuances of what Mike or my dad's position would be in selling the business, and what like my generation or in my position, what I would need to understand, and vice versa. But it's really helpful. It uses the parables. It talks about even Saul transitioning to David. It helped me really to walk with a sense of humility beyond, I would say beyond my age, just because of how it demonstrated it. And so it showed me, okay, maybe everything that I think I know, I really don't know. There are things that I'm not going to understand until I'm on the other side of this. And so that I'd highly recommend any kid that is looking at taking on or being part of the family business. This is definitely a must read in my opinion.
Cool.
Oh, great recommendation.
I wrote that one down. Mike, what do you?
Yeah, I discovered a new podcast. It's called Socrates in the Studio. I've mentioned Socrates in the City before. And a little bit of a disclaimer on it. You listen to the first 25 minutes, which is very good, but then to listen to the whole thing, you got to become a subscriber or pay a fee or something like that, which I didn't do. But it was this particular one was by Anthony Bradley, and it's Heroic Fraternities. I did not know this, but it came from the early 19th century, and it was based on Judeo-Christian ethics about the importance, and here was the punchline that really struck me, is that every great, courageous leader had to do it with a group. You can't do it in isolation. So, I think, well, Jesus had his apostles. You could go down the list of every great, whether it's Churchill or whatever, they do it for an audience, or they're doing it for people around them to help them. So in a business context, when you take on the crucible of leadership and you realize a lot of people are counting on you to make wise and prudent decisions, it can make you a great person. I'm sure you guys have all heard on like the news or something where a car catches on fire and just citizens will run up and pull somebody out of a burning car. And then they're called heroes. And they're saying, no, I just did the right thing for the right reasons. So I thought that was very fascinating. This Anthony Bradley with heroic fraternities. And his whole thrust is that we need to go back to the fraternities in the universities and really instill in them why they were originally created, the Judeo-Christian ethics about helping people. And he points out how many senators, presidents, Supreme Court justices were part of a fraternity. It never occurred to me that what happens when you're a part of a good group of people is it will inspire you to be a better person yourself. And that would be what another goal would be for Covarrica, is when people really understand the precepts and the ethos of why we do what we do, it will make all of us better people and more of us to where we're really making a difference in the lives of others. So that would be my recommendation on that. Also, one other thing too that I want to throw out there. It occurred to me when people start talking about, favorites because Chris is my son, or, Samantha works there, et cetera, et cetera. I want to point out that Jesus Christ himself had a half brother named James. Mm-hmm. And nowhere in the Bible do you see any favoritism to James. So favoritism is not going to help anybody. People have to earn their rights to lead. So I'll shut up after that.
Yeah, and the thing that if there's a common thread in this episode, it's good things come to people that raise their hand, and hard work is recognized.
Yeah.
Don't sit on the sideline and just wait for something to happen to you.
Yep.
So I really appreciate it, guys. This was an awesome episode.
Definitely.
And just want to appreciate everybody out there listening to today's episode of What It Takes to Lead. New episodes drop every other Thursday. Please give us a line if you have a question or a suggestion. You can also reach us at podcast@covarrica.com or on X at WITTLEOD. And finally, if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks so much.